When you speak to senior leaders about the people in the middle, they're terrified of losing them. They describe them as the glue that binds an organization together.
This is a debate that's been around for a long time and organizations haven't cracked it.
Why do you think?
I think it's partly because...
Meet Gary Cookson, an organizational consultant, author, and expert in workplace transformation, also the director of Epic with over 25 years of experience studying how organizations function. His work focuses on improving the employee experience, leadership effectiveness, and hybrid work. His new book, The Squeezed Middle, is the most honest and practical guide to one of the most undervalued roles in any organization.
70% of change initiatives fail, and a lot of that's often down to communication breakdown.
What struck me with the people who are happy is that they weren't always happy. Those people who are now happy have usually had a bad experience earlier on in their career. When you're in the middle, you have to do lots and lots of different things that aren't on people's job descriptions. It takes people by surprise. That's what makes it squeezed. So one of the quickest ways to establish the value of middle managers is...
Hello, Gary. Welcome to The Power Between.
Hello, Roddy. Really nice to be here.
Gary, it's really exciting to have you on the podcast. We have been speaking. We've been working a little bit together around a book that is just about to come out that you have written called The Squeezed Middle, which absolutely is center of the target for the Power Between podcast in as much as it looks at the challenges of mid-level leaders, middle management, and the things that organizations can do to help and support people in those roles and make them more productive. So I'm really keen to have a good chat and exploration around that. But beforehand, perhaps it'd be useful if you just give us a little bit of, in your own words, an introduction to how come you found yourself in the position where you're writing several books now around this kind of topic, and particularly hybrid work, which is also another angle that you're an expert in. How did the journey unfold?
Okay. Well, my experience in work has always been about how to make it better for people. Now, that's obviously a very broad church and lots of different angles you can explore there, but I think work should be a force for good. I think it should be something that people enjoy. And throughout my career, over a quarter of a century, I've been trying to work out, well, how do we do that? What are the blockers? What are the barriers? What are the things that we need to put in place, the building block to make that happen? And I've been doing that for a long, long time. And one of the key things I was doing over the last few years, which led to my first and second book, was looking at the way that organizations are adapting to the changed environment of remote and hybrid working, because that's a big opportunity, or was, maybe still is, to make work better for people by arranging work better around the personal commitments people might have, or the different plates that they might need to juggle. And it's not as easy, hybrid work, as just saying to people work 2 days here, 3 days there. That's the end result. But you can't just do that and think that you've solved it. There's a lot of things in the organizational system from a design perspective that we need to get right. And I started to explore those in my first two books, things like culture, structure, team relationships, processes, management and leadership behavior. And as I started to examine those, I realized that once I'd finished the second book, there was probably a third book that needed writing. And key to this was looking at the role of middle managers in the modern world of work, not just from a remote and hybrid working perspective, although that is a dedicated chapter in the book, but looking at what their role is now in managers. What are they doing? What should they be doing? How do we prepare people for that? How do we help them to succeed? And that led me to the conversations that we had some time ago about, should we write this book called The Squeezed Middle?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously, I'm very focused on the fact that people in the middle don't get as much support and development as they probably require and deserve, because it is a really difficult role to fill. And you mention, the paradox of the squeezed middle, which is, people in the middle are often targets for the excuse for underperformance or lack of productivity or whatever. Then, this is, well observed that, we call them the frozen middle or whatever. And yet, when you speak to senior leaders around the middle, about the people in the middle, they're terrified of losing them, and they describe them as the glue that binds an organization together, and they know that they're utterly essential. So, I mean, there's a real tension there, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. And that tension's been around for decades. When I was researching the book, I came across journal articles from the 1970s questioning the role of middle managers, talking about them being the squeeze middle, talking about how we need to value them more. This is a debate that's been around for a long time, and organizations haven't cracked it.
So why do you think that, I mean, the 70s is, a lifetime ago, pretty much for most of us. Why is organizations not woken up to it? Why are we still obsessed with people at the top of the organization and sort of irritated by people in the middle of the organization?
I think it's partly because the role of a middle manager or a manager in the middle is not really defined. Rarely is that the case in any organization. If you think about seniors, executive leadership, that kind of role is clearly defined. That's seen as a destination role. You really do know what that involves conceptually. It's a really easy one to get your head around. And it's easy to see a development pathway that might lead somebody to that, to kind of build up the knowledge and the skills they need. Equally, first line managers is a really easy conceptual role to get your head around. You understand that you are managing a team delivering frontline services. You may previously have been part of that team, that you have really clear functional responsibilities. Managers in between those things, not so much. It's not seen as a destination. It's usually seen as a stepping stone. There's a real lack of clarity, lots of ambiguity about what being in the middle really means. Partly because it has to mean different things in different organizations. But we tend to focus on the functional responsibilities of middle managers, i.e., I might be an IT manager in the middle of the organization, and my job description is packed full of all my IT specific responsibilities, or it might be marketing or HR or you name it. And it focuses on those things. That isn't really what being a middle manager is all about. That is just an extension of being a first line manager that you can prepare people quite well for. When you're in the middle, you have to do lots and lots of different things that aren't on people's job descriptions. And that's what makes it a really high pressure role, because it takes people by surprise. That's what makes it squeezed, because it's not part of the daily job in terms of what's there in the structure of that job description. And that's what makes it hard to develop people for, because we don't know, or they don't know, what they're headed for. So there's all kinds of problems that start to explore in this book.
You articulate that really clearly, and in the book too. But so what can organizations do? I mean, it sounds like quite a root and branch change then to get people to view these roles as people management roles, team leader roles, primarily, with the expertise bit sort of attached on the side, rather than the expertise in the middle and the team leadership just being an add-on that you attend to just sort of in the moments that appear, which of course rarely do.
And there's a case study in the book, and it's based on one of the experiences I had as a middle manager earlier in my career, where we consciously defined what the role was. Yes, we each had functional responsibilities, and that was probably about half of the remit of the job, but we made sure that we worked out we had responsibility as a tier of middle managers for these things. And individually as middle managers, we had responsibility for these other things too. And these were the expectations we had about how we worked together and how we operated individually and together. These were the expectations about how we would manage up, manage down, manage across. This is how we would meet. This is how we would behave. This was the development program that was wrapped around all of that. And then, yes, there was the functional responsibilities too, but it's very clear definition about what being a middle manager was and should look and feel like. And that brought clarity, that brought focus to us all, really improved the stock and the value of middle managers. It's lacking in lots of organizations.
There's lots around that, isn't there? I mean, the ambiguity of it, which is really what we're discussing here, is uncertainty is debilitating always. I mean, when you don't know what's required of you or how something's going to pan out, that's where we're nervous. Even if you get a piece of bad news, but you get it clearly, you can deal with it. But it's the ambiguity that's the problem. And if others from looking at it outside don't understand what you're quite supposed to be doing either, then that doesn't make it any better. So clarifying that, as you say, in something much more tangible is a really important first step. You also talk about upward influencing skills, which is something that we're not really taught or developed to do, but skills that a manager can deploy to ensure that their senior leaders understand the operational realities of the front line. How should one go around trying to acquire those? Is that something that can be taught in a workshop, or is it something you gather over time?
There's probably a bit of both in that. I mean, many people watching this podcast will be familiar with the 70-20-10 model, and that type of approach about how you think about how you structure your learning is a useful concept to have in mind. Some of that can be taught, and there's certainly no harm can come from trying to do so. Whether it's successful, different debate, but there's no harm in trying. At least it's better than doing nothing, and at least it will make people feel better, and I'm all for making people feel better. But I think there's a lot to be said for bringing middle managers together with other middle managers to identify how they do their stuff. That kind of stuff doesn't happen enough in organizations. Management, and certainly middle management, can feel like a really isolating position. When you have got to manage up, like you mentioned, but also manage down and manage across, you can feel like you're the only person with those kinds of issues going on. And a lot of it is invisible work, invisible labor that isn't called out, isn't made explicit. And having somebody who you can talk to about how you can bounce ideas off, share good practice with, an opinion from is critical. So as part of the development program or development pathway, yes, I see a clear role for formal training and development, but I see a much bigger role for informal on-the-job learning and working with peers in a community of practice, and through coaching and mentoring and challenging work. So I think there's room for all of those things.
Well, we're just starting our community of practice to provide exactly that, Ideas for Leaders, Sustainable Leadership Community, which does exactly that. And I think it's a really important way of exchanging knowledge and insights and perspectives, but also confidence building. I think if you discover other people are having the same challenges, concerns and obstacles and barriers, then that gives you the impetus to tackle it a little bit more and think you're not quite so out there on that. I mean, have you seen that being done well in organizations?
Not often. I've seen it done well, and some case studies in the book of organizations that are doing it well. But most of the research that I did and most of the case studies and examples are organizations that have got it wrong. And there is learning in that, because there's a realization of what's gone wrong, and it linked to themes explored in the book. Not many organizations get it right, not many. That's why there is still this debate about what's the real value of a middle manager, because very few organizations have cracked that.
And that goes back to this destination part as well, doesn't it? I mean, if we can identify, and that would be a really exciting sort of thing to try and do, but identify a role that appears in organizations that you can aim for, which isn't sitting in the chief executive's chair or whatever, being a C-suite executive, but because there's no doubt that these roles in the middle of organizations touch lots of people's lives, are influential, are important. And if they can be identified as being so, then that's a really exciting and valuable way to do it. But at the moment, people aren't valuing it.
One of the people I spoke to in the research called middle managers the magnificent middle rather than the squeeze middle, which is, if I'm honest, a better book title than the one that we've come up with together. I think I would love to have that as a book title, but he was onto something. Now, middle managers, there's a stereotype of a middle manager as a bureaucratic blocker, somebody who's average, in the middle, blocking work. That's not the case. Or at least it shouldn't be the case if we get the role right. They're the translators that keep work flowing. They are doing really complex relational work. They are working around problems. They are solving conflict before it bubbles up to the surface. So they are doing magnificent work. They are highly reflective, highly networked operators. And if they're removed from organizations, then you see the value they created, because there's nobody to do that kind of stuff anymore. And execution might fall down at that point. So one of the quickest ways to establish the value of middle managers is get rid of them, see what doesn't get done then. And that you often find that in organizations that they do delayer and then very quickly put those layers back.
Put those layers back in.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there is this sort of idea that, you know, flatter hierarchy organizations are more efficient, or and in this world, you know, we can do a bit of delayering in the middle. And I think what's becoming clearer now is, in fact, there's only a limited number of, you know, if you're doing your people management part of middle management well, you can't have 300 people reporting to you, or that you're responsible for it directly, because, you know, there isn't enough time in the day to do the things that you're supposed to be doing in one-to-ones and reviews and supporting and guiding to do that. So some element of hierarchy in that pyramid is required, just because in order to do this job well, you need time and space to do it. Have you come across that sort of issue in the organizations, the research that you've been looking at?
Yeah, in some of the organizations. And it's difficult to compare things like hierarchies, spans of control type of stuff, because every context matters is the point I'll make there. That depends what people are doing. If you've got 300 people all doing the same job, that's a lot easier than 300 people all doing different jobs. But that kind of span of control can work, but what it requires is other things to be aligned in the organizational system, not to put all of that through the bottleneck of one middle manager, because they do become then blocker. Things won't get done. They have to then have a competent team around them, working with them. They have to have managers underneath them, reporting to them, who know exactly how things work. And they get the best work done then through other people, through ensuring other people are effective at doing that invisible work as well as them. So I wouldn't say that huge spans of control are impossible, but they require careful thought. They require deliberate, conscious effort to make them work. And there are some organizations that do that really well, but most don't.
And then there's this whole role around sort of sense making, isn't there? You point out in the book that, and it's sort of well observed, that, you know, 70% of change initiatives fail, and a lot of that's often down to communication breakdowns, and the middle management has a really strong role to play there. What are the practical things that a good manager in that position should be doing and looking to, rather than, you know, just muddling through? What's the structured, effective approach?
Well, I call this in book invisible labor. And the things I mean by that are the kind of things you've hinted at. A lot of the job is sense making. It is things like calming anxiety, preventing conflict before it erupts. They have a lot of responsibility for making things work. They are looking at the culture. They're looking at how things land with their teams. They're looking at how they translate senior directives into something practical for their teams. They're also passing feedback up from their teams and putting that in a context that senior leaders will understand. And a lot of that work, that's emotional, that's relational work, holding teams steady, translating strategy, spotting cracks before they shatter and hurt anybody. And that is sense making. And sense making, it's a skill that's very often named, trained, or rewarded. And that's some of the problem we've got. So we've got senior leaders who are prioritizing vision and strategy, rightly so, but they're forgetting the people who make that real, who translate that into something practical, tangible for their teams. And because a lot of that is emotional labor, it's overlooked, it's put under the carpet, it's written off as an extra rather than core work. And I think if we make that core work, if we recognize, label, call out those skills, we can then build them into role profiles, we can build them into development ways, and we'll start to really recognize and make more visible the value that middle managers bring, because if we don't do that sense making, that's where you go down the route of change initiatives and all of the things failing or not working as well.
I mean, it's interesting. Isn't it? I mean, it's very much on that old phrase that, no one ever remembers the best generals, because basically they've solved the problem before the battle happens. And to an extent, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about being able to keep the machine sufficiently oiled, sufficiently friction free that we don't need to take it all apart and rebuild it. And in a transition, a work change transition, there's inevitably going to be lots of sort of friction arriving. So people who have that ability, that radar to sense make, spot issues down the line, help and support others, are really valuable. But as you say, they're the generals who don't get recognized because there isn't a crisis. The crisis doesn't happen. And so everyone just thinks it's fine. And because it happens invisibly, as you say, then no one takes any notice. So it's a real challenge, that, isn't it? And someone needs to sort of be aware and make a noise about the fact that this is happening without any noise being made. Is it like Ferrari putting these sort of new exhaust noises into their electric cars to make people know that they're going fast?
Yeah,
maybe we need a version of that in organizations.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. I'll use that one.
Storytelling is a part of that, I think, and it's something I'm always. Storytelling is hugely primal to humans, and people who can do it well and do it with a degree of passion and empathy and make people want to listen have an additional power that those who don't do it quite so well fail to have. And again, storytelling is something that we never teach anyone really to do. And it needn't be a sort of narrative storytelling, but it's that explaining, putting the message out. How have you seen, and what do you say in the book about enabling people to improve their skills around that?
Well, I think I call them in the book soft skills, which is a well understood label, but one I'm not entirely comfortable with. So I've tried to reframe them a little bit as smart skills or core operating skills. And you mentioned storytelling, that's a part of it. And you mentioned that as human beings, we are programmed to respond well to stories because stories provoke emotion in people. And that's what we identify with, not necessarily the narrative, but the emotion that comes from that narrative. And a lot of the skills that I think middle managers lack, should have, and can make a difference with, quite EQ heavy, emotional intelligence heavy stuff, curiosity, reflection, empathy, all of those types of things. And they are part of storytelling, all of those things. If a story is crafted well enough, it will inspire and convey all of those things that enables people to realize what this means in their context, to generate their own ideas and to ask their own questions from it and to think, yeah, that makes sense. I understand that better now because of that, and to have an emotional connection to what the organization is trying to do. And so when a middle manager tells stories about what the organization is doing or individuals' role within it, then they are painting a very vivid picture for people. People can see the hero's journey in that. People can see the trials and tribulations of all of that. They can see the story arc planning out of how the organization needs to change. And that is a really powerful way of making sense of what's going on in organizations right down to an individual level. We don't put that enough with middle managers.
No, I think we do. But a lot of this, again, comes down to lack of time often. So, I mean, obviously, people who are really good at it understand it, get it, but probably really enjoy doing it too. And so, therefore, they make the time to do it, or it happens naturally because it's something they really enjoy doing. But those who have to be more intentional about it need to find the time to do it. So maybe we're going into a golden zone, because I know that you say in the book, AI should relieve a lot of middle managers of some of the sort of routine administrative tasks and open up more space to do this kind of stuff. Are we seeing that happen?
No, because lots of mistakes being made. Lots of experimentation, and I'm all for experimentation with AI and any other things that are new in organizations, but it has to be framed. It has to be done within a context. We have to make it clear what people can do, what they can't do, give them some guardrails, allow for experimentation, but also culture learning from mistakes, help them to focus on the right things. So you think about things like the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. What are the 20% of things that take up 80% of a middle manager's time? Can you focus your efforts on AI on those things rather than a scattergun type of approach? So where I see organizations failing is failing to have that framework around what they're doing with AI. They're leaving it to individual choice, and therefore there is that haphazard scattergun approach. And probably that's a subject of another book or another podcast, perhaps, about how to do that right. But from a middle management perspective, they need guidance. What are the things they need to be using AI for, that when that's done, will free them up to do other things? What are those other things? How do they do those even better? At the moment, it's being left to chance, and that's never a good thing.
No, so the imperative is, I suppose, for people who have a more strategic oversight of organizations to be enabling that, so that they can enable middle managers to have that greater space. I mean, I was reading yesterday, and I hope to bring her onto the podcast at some stage. She's a North American consultant called Charlene Johnson, who publishes the Work Absurdity Report, which is a great name in itself. But she's looking at exactly these kinds of things. That in fact, a lot of it is the failure of organizational structure to allow people to have sufficient time and space to do the things they're meant to be doing. And because that doesn't exist, we overcompensate as individuals. We take on too much. We feel constantly stressed, and then we burn out. And that's not a reflection on the individual. More often than not, that's a reflection on the structure that they have to work within.
Yes, but more than that, just taking that analogy a little bit further, she's right to identify causal factors there and contextual factors. Structure is not the word I would use here. I think the organizational system is what I would use. And structure is one aspect within that. And there are others too. It's misleading perhaps to focus entirely on structure, because you think of structure in terms of organization charts. And therefore you can see, as middle managers, let's take them out. That makes that shorter. That makes us cheaper. That's risky. I think if you're going to make changes, or if you're going to try and improve organizations, you've got to think wider than just structure. Organization design uses system principles, and that's the kind of thought process that I encourage people to have. How do we align everything? How do we get everything right in the environment, in the context? Structure is one of those things, but there are others.
To give her due, I think structure was probably my miswording of it.
Sorry.
Rather than system. But no, but you're absolutely right to point that out, because structure and systems are different. And again, structure is something that's probably quite easy to design, whereas systems are much more complex, and they evolve and they adapt. And so but it's the systems systems can circumnavigate structure as well, and to an extent, I suppose that's what we're both talking, or you and she are both talking about there, is that individual systems evolve to compensate, whereas we ought to design them in the first place so that they optimize. That sort of, when we were talking about AI, you also talk about this sort of learnership and the hybrid future, which obviously reflects back into what your earlier books, which was sort of off the back of remote working. How can middle managers move away from sort of command and control style focus and focus more on sort of coaching and mentoring for themselves, but also for their reports? Is that possible to do from a middle management position in terms of initiating it? Or does the environment have to be created higher up, do you think?
A bit of both, and both are helpful, but it's a critical thing for a middle manager to do. And I make the point in the book that we exist in a really high change environment in the workplace now. And just look at the last 5 or 6 years, what we went through with the pandemic and lockdowns and integrating AI and remote working and all those things. And that's the perfect storm for people to change what they do, to adapt, to learn new skills. And in fact, it's critical that they do. If we fail to learn, if we fail to adapt, we will be left behind in the world of work. We will be left behind by society, perhaps. And middle managers critical to making that happen, setting the tone for that in the organization. They see more from the position in where they are in the organization than many others do in an organization. They have a wider network than many others do in the organization. They're able to see what's coming, what's working, what's not, what the risks are. And through sharing some of those things, they can then translate that into what that means for people's jobs, people's skill sets, people's mindsets. They can encourage teams again to experiment, to take risks, to learn from mistakes, to figure out how they need to be flexible in how work is done in order to cope with increased use of automation and artificial intelligence, to cope with changes to when and where work is done and who does that bit of work, to reflow, repurpose, reframe work to make it better for everybody. That can't be done just in individual teams because that's too narrow and blinkered. Can't be done from the top down in an organization because it's too nebulous and vague. That can be done by middle managers because they're in the right position to do it.
I mean, you've obviously spoken to a huge number of people at all levels of organization in doing the research around this and read widely around it. Do you get a sense that there are people, are there more people out there who are actually really pleased and happy to be in that middle management role? Or are most people frustrated and sort of constrained and either trying to shin themselves up to a senior management role or just want to escape the whole thing altogether?
I've come across both. And what struck me with the people who are happy is that they weren't always happy. And those people who are now happy have usually had a bad experience earlier on in their career and are happy now because they've figured it out, learned from mistakes, got it right second time round. And the people who are unhappy are usually first-time middle managers. And that tells me something. Tells me something about what people are learning, the experiences that they have that have shaped them, and what we need to do to get that right. So there are people who've got it right, but to experience getting it wrong first.
Worked out that the grass isn't necessarily always greener on the other side of that fence.
Well, partly that, but also you learn from experience. I've been married twice, Roddy, and my second marriage is a hell of a lot better than the first one because I learned from that experience. And it is that type. That was a very expensive experience as well, by the way. But you learn from things like that. And if you've gone into a middle management position and crashed and burned, well, you either run away from that or you go back for a second go at that and you learn from what you've done in the first time round. And the people I've spoke to who've got it right have had that experience.
So I think this is really interesting because the reason the first experience, and I'm talking about middle management here, not marriage, but it probably applies to both, is because we have an idea in our head of what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
And that idea has to have come from somewhere. And it's either been role modeled by someone you've worked for or under, or it's out there in the common culture. It's sort of the myth of what those roles are like. And we go in expecting X and we discover that it's not X, it's probably not even Y, it's probably C or D, or something really quite completely different. And in terms of middle management, that often is the fact that it doesn't bring you authority and power to make enormous changes. What it requires is a lot of listening, a lot of guiding, a lot of parenting really going on. And that may not be the image that people initially have. But like those things, parenting's great. It's fantastic. It's full of challenges, but it's full of rewards too. But it's not, and it's endless. So is the problem how we set the image of these roles, perhaps, for people when they go into their careers?
It is very much that you don't know what you don't know until you get there, and too much is unknown to people further down the organisation, even further up the organisation, and we learn from sometimes bitter experience, and we take that forward, and the next time round it is better. It's sad that that's the case, but that is the case.
Do you think there are places, there are opportunities, there are people in organizations who can help
Yes.
shape our preconceptions?
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah,
it can't just be down to the Power Between podcast to do that.
No, it's not. There are lots of people who've got that power and the influence, and they exist in all places in organizations. So you could start at the top, the senior team. They have been middle managers at an early point in their career, and it's helpful for them to share their career journey, what they liked, what they disliked during that time, what they learned from that, and how that's helped them to develop other middle managers who are in the organization now. People who are currently in roles can talk about what they are enjoying and what they don't, and they can share that with as wide a group as possible. And then there are people, say, in HR or L&D type positions who may have that helicopter view of the pipeline of middle managers or managers per se, and look at what competencies there are, what attributes we have, what the value set is, and look at how we are building those, having some consistency on those through the organization. So there's lots of people who've got a role to play here. There isn't just one. It takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And that analogy, that phrase, it really resonates with me, because I've got this still sort of half-baked view, which I mention from time to time on the podcast, which is around the need for having elders in these organizations. You know, in indigenous societies, you have the chiefs and the people with authority and power, but you then have a whole strata of elders who have wisdom, experience, and they don't necessarily need to be old, but they have expertise in various things. But what they really are a sort of set of eyes and ears that can go and identify people who are at moments of transition or moments of need, and they can offer support for the benefit of the organization. And it seems like that's what humans flourish and thrive when there's that kind of opportunity made available to them, and the people in those roles do so as well. So I think it's if we can try and find roles like that, then we can make it the magnificent middle, and we can make it the magnificent middle with those smart skills that you talk about. There's lots to be done, and your book shines a great light on that. So Gary, thank you very much. It's been fabulous to talk to you.
Likewise, really enjoyed it.